Alright, so I've now completed the first of 5 levels of Pimsleur Mandarin Chinese, and in this video I want to discuss what I liked, what I did not like, my experience as a whole, whether or not I'll continue to use it in the future, and maybe some tips that I would have for anyone considering using Pimsleur Chinese for the first time. So overall, I would rate my experience with Pimsleur an 8 out of 10. That may just be because my expectations for how enjoyable a program like this should be are too high. But I think the enjoyability aspect of it is really the only thing that would keep me from giving this a 10 out of 10. I really enjoy the way the Pimsleur method works. I think the way it gets you speaking from the very beginning is a huge confidence booster. I know many language enthusiasts, especially on YouTube, recommend holding off on speaking too much. They take more of an input-based approach where you really don't try to speak until you've had so much input that the words kind of just start to come to your mind, and then you're able to speak more naturally. And I agree with that, but I do think there's some merit in speaking right away, because at least for me, I have a hard time measuring and seeing my progress if I'm not able to see how much I'm able to speak, how clearly and how comfortable I'm able to communicate with others. And so I think if I didn't start to speak right away, then I would lose motivation because I don't know how to measure how good I'm doing when all I'm getting is input. I can measure how many hours of input I'm getting, but how much I'm understanding and how much I'm improving is a hard thing to measure. You can feel it at times, but for me, I haven't figured out a way to measure that. And so it's really important for me to speak just to keep my confidence up and keep my motivation going so that I can continue to learn the language and not get burnt out. So will I include Pimsleur Chinese in my future Chinese studies? Yes. It's been very effective for me, and I plan on going through all 5 levels of it. Why not? It's super inexpensive. If you do the subscription, I think it's $20 a month to have access to all the lessons, and you could finish it in 5 months. You finish all the levels, all 5 30-lesson, 1 lesson a day levels for just about $100. One level used to be over $100. When I bought Pimsleur Chinese level 1 and level 2 forever ago, I know I spent over $100 for each of those levels, and now you can get all 5 for just $100. So for me, it's a killer deal. I don't know why you'd not consider doing it if you're serious about learning a language. So another reason why I'll be including Pimsleur as a part of my language study is because I know for me, and I've heard the same thing for others, if you don't have like a specific regimen to follow, sometimes it can be really overwhelming. If you're doing a lot of self-study, coming up with your own methods of study or borrowing some from others, it can be difficult to know whether or not what you're doing is going to work for you. Pimsleur has been proven to be effective at least to a certain extent, and so if I'm doing that even on the side of all my other language studies, I'll know that I'll at least get as good as the average person who does all 5 levels of Pimsleur. And for me, that's good enough. I mean, I'd love to be as conversationally fluent as possible, but if all I got to was knowing all the knowledge I could get out of the 5 levels of Pimsleur Chinese, I think that would be sufficient. That's more than most people will ever get in their lifetime. Now, I said that I'd be using Pimsleur as a part of my language study. That's because I know that Pimsleur by itself can't really get you to a very fluent level, from what I've heard anyway, from other people that have used it. I don't think you can get to fluency, especially in a difficult language for English learners like Chinese, in just 5 months, like they say. And so Pimsleur wasn't meant to get you to fluency. It's more meant to get you to a point where you can start consuming more complex content. So in the midst of my use of Pimsleur, I plan on using some other things. I have and will continue to watch a lot of YouTube. I've been using Peppa Pig as a resource. I think there's Peppa Pig in just about every language you can think of, from what I understand. And there's a ton of Chinese episodes of Peppa Pig that don't have English subtitles. The reason I'm using Peppa Pig instead of some Chinese drama is because I'm nowhere near the level where I could watch a Chinese drama without subtitles and understand what's going on. I can barely distinguish between the words they're using because just like a lot of Americans do, we mumble when we talk, and so all the words kind of get jumbled together and I can't separate them yet. So I've been using Peppa Pig, and also I've installed a Chrome plugin called Learning Language with YouTube. I'm not sure if it's the same one as Learning Language with Netflix. I know a lot of people use that. But I've really enjoyed it so far. So you install the plugin, and then when you're watching YouTube, when I'm watching Peppa Pig, along with the subtitles, which come standard with pretty much every video on YouTube, you can hover over the words on the screen and it'll pause the video. A little pop-up will come up and it'll show you the English translation of it. And on top of that, you can sometimes click the word and it'll pronounce the Chinese for you. And so that's been really useful. And then you can also right click any of those words or an entire phrase, and it'll save it on the side of the video in it's like a deck of flashcards. And then you save the words and make sure all the definitions are correct. And then every time you see that word again in the video, it's highlighted red. Or I don't know if you can change the color. It's highlighted red on my screen. And so you know you've seen that word before, and you don't have to add it to the deck again. And then that's really useful because when I see that red word, I know that that's a word I just learned. And for some reason, knowing that I've seen the word before, it makes the definition that I just saw earlier pop right into my head. Otherwise, if it wasn't highlighted, I wouldn't know for sure if I had seen it before. And so it'd be hard for me to like ascribe a definition to it. So yeah, language learning with YouTube. It's been super useful and I highly recommend you look into it. So if you're thinking about using Pimsleur as you move forward with learning a language, here's a few things that I would recommend that helped me or that I wish I would have done. So maybe this will help you. So number one, I would build some familiarity with the language first. So I've had a little bit of Chinese background. I never took Chinese in high school and I never really studied it intensively, but I've had some casual study on and off for the past 3 years. And so I've learned quite a bit as like a general background. I know how the language sounds, so I'm kind of used to it. But a lot of my study I did on Duolingo. So I would say that I probably had around a 20 character knowledge. Like I could read those characters, pick them out of a book or an advertisement or something like that. And I probably knew a total, like had like solidly memorized a total of 80 words maybe, and could formulate several sentences with those words. But yeah, I had a little bit of a background in Chinese, and so I think that helped me a ton when I started using Pimsleur. If I didn't have that background, I think when I started using Pimsleur, I would have been a lot more frustrated. The first lesson was like easy, piece of cake, I know all this. Second lesson, same thing. Third lesson started to get a little harder, and by the fourth lesson, I feel like I was comfortable, but I was still being pushed. And so throughout the remainder of the 30 lessons, I felt like I could do every lesson and I didn't feel like I was getting behind. It's totally fine to repeat levels if you have to. It's recommended if you're not getting above 80% or so of the answers correct while you're taking the lessons. For me, however, it just wasn't exactly motivating to have to repeat lessons, so I tried to avoid it. I'd recommend spending a few minutes a day for a few weeks in Duolingo just to get familiar with the language. And then when you start Pimsleur, it'll be a lot more enjoyable because you'll already be ahead of most people who start, and you'll be cruising through the first lessons that are catered to somebody who has no experience at all. So the second thing that I would recommend if you're starting Pimsleur for the first time is go at your own pace, whether that be faster or slower. It says, and it's recommended, that you only do one lesson a day, which is probably best for spaced repetition purposes. And it also says to repeat lessons if necessary. But for me, I was doing pretty well, and I felt like I could go faster, but I kind of stuck to one lesson a day, probably because the motivation wasn't entirely there to do 2 a day. But I wish I would have, because I don't think it would have been that detrimental to my comprehension of the lessons. And even if I did have to redo 4 or 5 lessons, I would have been way further ahead than just doing 1 lesson a day. The third thing I'd recommend looking into is having a routine. Language learning is really hard. I haven't had a ton of experience in it. I'm obviously a native English speaker, and I learned Tagalog or Filipino to a decently high level, and that was really difficult. And now that I'm learning Chinese, which is even a harder language to learn, it takes a lot of effort. Like I said, I've been doing it on and off. I haven't been doing like tons of intense study, but it's been 3 years. It's been a while. And I still can't hold a conversation about anything other than like just super basic questions about who they are and their family situation and things like that. So it's not always going to be the most enjoyable thing when you're learning a language. Sure, it's rewarding at times. A lot of times it's rewarding, but not every single part of your language learning journey is going to be enjoyable. And that's what Pimsleur is for me. It's not super enjoyable. I don't love it. I love the progress I make when I stick to it, but it's really not that enjoyable, and I only have so much willpower, and if I use all my willpower at the beginning of the day and throughout the day on other things, when I get to the end of the day and all my willpower is spent, odds are I'm probably not going to make that decision to do another Pimsleur course or Pimsleur lesson. So if I were you, I'd have a schedule, and I did this too. I had a fixed time in the morning that I would start my Pimsleur lesson, and if I didn't do it then, I honestly just didn't do it at all that day. And so have a schedule, do it early in the morning before all your willpower is spent, and I think that'll keep you on track. So after 30 lessons, I've completed the first of 5 levels of Pimsleur Chinese. Would I recommend it? Yes. Is it effective? It was for me. Will it make you fluent? I wouldn't count on it. That's not what it's meant for. If this video was helpful at all, please let me know by giving it a like, maybe leaving a comment down below. And if you're interested in seeing any future updates on my continued use of Pimsleur, maybe hit the subscribe button and the bell so that you'll be notified when I make a new video. See ya!